Okay, we can start now. It is now 10:05 on Wednesday, the 11th. And this is the meeting of the Finance Committee of this date. Welcome to those who are here and to Mike. Roll call. I'm here. Bob Heffernan is here. Austin is here. Kimberly is here. Amy is here. Mike Hogan is on Zoom. Carolyn Jones is here. Calvin Jaber is absent, but we have a quorum. So let's proceed with minutes from July 22. Any comments or corrections, or can we just presume absent any?
I just had a few things that I'm
Okay.
gonna pass over in terms of grammar,
Sure.
but other than that, I'll just pass it on.
Okay. Then we will consider this approved and
Richard, Richard, I did have one question
yes,
on the current workflow section of the Finance Committee minutes, which is the first page.
item 4.
It was the number.
Mine's on 12/5/23. Do
Huh?
I have the old minutes?
Yeah, those
Yeah.
are old.
Okay.
We're in July.
Yeah, I just looked at, I guess this came in my my email unless I hope I got the right, I pulled up the right email. Anyway, never mind. We'll skip that then.
Okay. Then let's proceed to item number 4, which is finance report.
So when I presented in July, there was talk about needing a narrative and the backup and kind of a overall, like there's a bit to be desired in the reports. So we're taking a stab at reconstructing them to make it a little easier to read for the board, that we can just give them a one-sheeter and they understand what's happening.
Rather than go through all this explanation of.
Yes.
Mhm.
And then for the finance committee, it would be the one-sheeters with the backup for us to
Mhm.
explore more. So we did start to put some stuff together. There is a financial reports in the top right corner.
But
It's the new sheet.
Yeah, there's 2 of them. That is another one.
I have another one.
Oh, was it on the agenda attached?
I believe
Yes,
so,
yes.
Is
I
it
didn't
this?
want anyone to think I'm on my phone. I have.
the
I
next page.
I'm reading from the agenda.
Is that
So
the
this one.
financial? Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Right.
So we broke this down of what is required by policy, what we actually have, and our shortfalls or overages. So we started out with our policy, what is currently in the policy. If we change it, of course, that would change it, and we broke it down for operating and capital.
Mhm.
So operating would include our revenues, our according to the cash policy, our revenues, our resiliency, and our insurance, self-insurance. While the capital is our capital budget. So we broke those up to show them differently because we're thinking about investing them differently
Mhm.
for that to start
Mhm.
working.
It's a question on resiliency. It's a factor of what? Like, how do you keep building it?
So it's actually based on historic cost of assets.
Okay,
So we have it set at 2% right now,
okay.
and that's what we're supposed to be keeping as a resiliency type fund. It's not actually, I don't think it's actually called resiliency, but like in the description, it's
Okay.
used for those purposes.
All right.
And where is that? What line is that?
The resiliency fund is in our cash reserve policy. Our cash reserve policy breaks down of what we want in each category. But that would be included in the operating reserves.
So you're.
Where's that?
Sorry.
So operating reserves, no, the other one.
I don't think the other one was printed.
It was in the
Was
packet
Was
that
in
was
the
sent.
packet.
small print, okay.
Are you? I just want to clarify, rainy day fund, I'm gonna use a technical term for it versus resilience. Do you have both?
So it's all captured in our reserve
Okay,
policy.
okay. The reason I say this is I'm trying to get the city to have two. Because I want them to understand you have to have enough money to keep operating. But you separately, you know, this because you're a treasurer, you need resiliency because maybe you have to buy a property or
The
you know, who
abstract.
knows?
Yes,
It's a total different animal.
it's knowing how to work your money.
That's right. And so I'm not there yet, but
Which is kind of what we're trying to grasp of how should they be broken up into the different buckets. So that
We
is what we're
actually need
working
them in
on.
order to see when something
Yeah.
runs short, how to work it.
exactly. And how we funded, you know,
Yes,
where does that
Yeah.
money come from
absolutely.
on resilience?
So in doing yours, you might wanna.
Yeah.
Think it from that perspective.
Well, we want to change up how the cash reserve policy is structured as well, because the way that we do it is much different than everybody else.
Oh,
Everybody else typically does it off of, isn't it, so many months of operations?
Yeah,
And
so they'll
that's,
have like their buckets of so many months of operations is their reserve.
uh-huh.
And then if they have other accounts, it'll be like a resiliency account and
but we,
Who's everybody else?
other
So-
municipalities.
other municipalities, I mean, obviously, we're different because we focus in on the utility side, the
Yes.
city focuses on, you know, the streets and
else.
everything
Right.
else.
Yes,
Right.
But we do think it could be better because the way that you look at it now is the breakdown you do, is it 25% of this year's capital, Kim?
For
Yeah.
O and M,
Yeah.
25% of O and
No,
M,
yeah, 20, and then doesn't it break down on capital too?
15% for this year, and then 15% of the 5 years, so 30% of the current year,
Yeah.
15% of the 4 years.
So you're essentially double dipping too,
Yeah.
because you're getting
Sounds like
current year and then
Yeah.
you're breaking down, you're doing 15% of 5 year.
Okay.
yeah, you're working it twice.
Yeah, which again, you're going back, like for us, we're trying to clean up a lot of stuff that was done in the past to make it and bring it to the 21st century.
Yeah,
We
but you
also,
got stuff here that was from 2019.
oh, you have no idea. I mean,
Yeah.
even the investment policies, it's the same way,
Yeah,
because
right,
the
yeah,
investment policies right now, they're very, very broad, and we've talked about this.
Right.
We talked about tightening that
Yeah.
up. It's kind of where do you start?
Mhm.
The other thing we did is we got the line of credit. Because we knew we had a long way to go.
Yeah.
We secured the line of credit to essentially be there as a placeholder. It's not costing us money to be there.
Sure.
In case.
But if we need
But
to,
it's a good contingency.
Mhm.
Yeah,
it
it's
is.
really
And
good.
we haven't used it to date. So
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Okay,
But this is like the starting point of trying to think about our reserves and investing and how they should be broken up, because right now it's just one big lump.
and it's sitting.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole thing about
Yeah.
reserves. You better not to work them.
and we want to invest it to
Which
meet
is-
what our needs are for each one of the utilities.
Yeah,
Right now-
time frame.
Correct, because right now it's a pot of money that's invested the same way across the board. And it's looked at as one pot of money that's invested that way. Our goal is to say, we want, you know, water, our needs are X and we need to have returns of Y.
Yep.
That's how
In order to meet the,
Yeah,
That's right.
that's where we're moving.
That's what we're
that-
trying to
yeah.
get to.
Good. absolutely
So-
right direction.
So for operating reserves, you're suggesting to have that actually broken out instead of lumped together.
Yes,
for that.
first of all, any budget that is a big ticket item is vulnerable to new boards saying, well, there's enough money
Yeah, they
there
think
to
there's
go
a lot
do
of
this
money
project,"
there.
Right, but you know, I don't know what the philosophy is yet, and I didn't fully read the investment strategy, to be honest. So the city is gonna go with a 6-month rainy day fund. Okay, I think that's where I'm moving them to. Carolyn got them to 5 months. And so I'm following her lead there. And then a separate resiliency fund. I don't know where that funding, how we're gonna get that money yet. So that they're not viewed as similar pots of money.
Yes.
Resiliency is really not touched unless there is a resiliency issue
Yes.
that we have to
A
address.
real issue.
Crisis, a real crisis.
Yeah.
So that's 6 months of,
Operating expenses. We could, if everything fell apart, we could keep operating the city for 6 months.
It's like your own personal
Which-
account at
yeah,
home.
what's
You know?
what's your yearly expenses?
Well, the budget is 12 million.
So you're roughly $6 million.
Yes. Yes.
You kind of need a logic for that bigger resiliency fund.
You absolutely do need a lot
You
of.
need some kind of logic that says only touch it when, after the hurricane.
That's exactly. It's gotta
Exactly
be
right,
super protected.
yeah.
And the new bill from the governor, as you mentioned, they were on subcommittee. Comp plans are gonna have to speak to resiliency, like we're all headed in the right direction here to do it. But you're absolutely right. You need to put guardrails on it. I don't even know how to get it funded first. I mean, that's my first issue. Where's the money? gonna
Small
come from?
technicality.
Yes.
But then once it's set up,
Yeah.
because it's gotta be a percentage of something. In other words, it's gotta self-generate somehow unless you have, it's like an endowment.
Yes, because
Yeah.
if not, you
It's really what
know,
it's like.
right.
Yeah.
When when Kim and I were at the Business and Financial Conference in Savannah, was it 2 years ago?
Yeah.
The one lady from, and I think I said this last time, the one lady stood up from Florida and they had a reserve account that was specific to resiliency and it had 15 million in, and all of their community was pissed that you had $15 million in there and what are you gonna do with it?
Ugh.
First hurricane that came through completely wiped them out.
Yeah.
And they took that 15 million and put it right back in the system and their lights were on. I think it was like 3 or 4
Uh-huh.
times quicker than
Uh-huh.
everybody else.
That's a
Uh-huh.
good story. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So that
Yeah.
now they can see why that amount is there.
I may need you to be a guest speaker at the city finance
Yeah.
meeting.
That's fine with me.
So,
This,
go ahead.
Sorry,
Oh,
Kim,
there
I
we
didn't want to cut you off. Please go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
So a couple of important things to point out here, the structure of trying to break these components out. The way this was originally presented was the operating reserves and the capital reserves were kind of lumped in one group and then given one singular investment policy statement. The investment policy statement gave UBS, who is the current manager, a wide range of a wide latitude for operating and how they were going to invest the assets. I think that taking this first step of trying to break the reserves up into components that may be invested very differently is a good first step. And it allows us to maybe better define what each one of these particular pools of assets are for. And Amy, to your point, we could break it up even finer than this. We also are spending a lot of time trying to break it up by utility because these different utilities have different economic or different financial sort of complexions. Some of them may have more volatility in their revenues and their expenses. Some of them may have less. One of the things that concerns me a little bit about using rules of thumb, simply saying, 6 months of expenses, for example, to make sure we can keep going, is it kind of ignores the complexion of the individual utilities in this case, or maybe the city in another case. Whenever I look at averages, normally the average, if you actually look at the individuals that make up the average, they're all over the place. You can average out anything if you haven't, if you have more than two components, but they might not look anything alike. So I think what this is also helping us set up is once we have a better definition of how we want to use these pools, we actually should be able to think a little bit more deeply about what is the appropriate amount. Right now, we're accepting the amount that has already been established unquestioningly. That may turn out to be the right amount, but I think this is going to help us, as a next iteration of this, once we have the reporting and the structures in place, to think a little bit more deeply about what the right numbers are. And they may vary by utility, but when they're aggregated up to the overall organization, that'll be the number that it is. It'll be kind of a weighted average of the various utilities. The other thing is this structure allows us to do more types of funds. These kind of fall under the umbrella of special purpose funds, funds that the organization may designate for certain particular endeavors. So right now, breaking it up between operating and capital is a first cut, but there can certainly be other cuts here. And so we're trying to also make sure we have a structure that we can monitor as well. So the potentially could cause to allow us to be able to rethink what the actual policies are, what percentages, how do we create those ratios? How do we invest these different pools? What is each one of these pools should have its own investment policy statement. And I think to the extent that the policy statements differ, you shouldn't be lumping the assets together in a singular pool, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
No, it does make sense, and it also relates to looking at a long-term budget where you know that there's a major cost that is repeated. So that pool, if I'm gonna use that
Exactly
term, Mike, that pool has a different investment strategy because in 3 years, we're gonna have to do, a $5 million upgrade of something, because we already know it, and so that we're gonna maybe need to be more aggressive to get more money in that pool, and then it calms itself back down again. So that gives us more real flexibility.
But it
Absolutely.
clarifies it.
In
Yes,
fact, just to take that a step farther, Amy, one of the things that Richard and Kim and Austin and I have been talking about is sort of taking a 10-year view on the viewpoint of the economics of the organization, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But a big reason for that is there's a lot of lumpy capital expenditures that are coming down the pike, and so if you start to think about capital reserves as one potential pool of funding for those capital expenditures, you now have to start making decisions about how much of the capital expenditures are going to be funded with current ratepayers. In other words, charging rates that are large enough to start building up pools of assets now to replace assets in the future, versus what you're going to be paid by future ratepayers. Now, there's definitely an overlap between the two, but they're not the same. And for future ratepayers to pay, we'd have to take on loans or other types of funding that would need to be paid for in the future. So one of the things I think that the organization could benefit from is a deep discussion on, if we have a $10 million capital expenditure coming up, let's say in 5 years, do we start raising the money now with current ratepayers? Or do you take a loan at that 5-year time period and charge future ratepayers to pay for the debt service? And I think these are really interesting conversations to have. And a lot of it might hinge on what things are about future growth versus what things are depreciating assets. The people that are using the infrastructure today are depreciating the asset. We should recognize that depreciation in asset, and that should probably be reserved for. But I'm rambling here a little bit, and I apologize. My real point here is that by starting to think a little bit more deeply about these different components, I think we can arrive at some interesting policy decisions here that are very defensible.
Mike, I used to manage, it's gonna even seem like a nano group to you guys. I mean, it was 32 water customers, okay, out of 60. But they were a gnarly group, and at 32, every single person there. But the conversation that you just had reminded me of a policy conversation we had of, should everybody, whether you're a current customer or not, be part of the system, because the system itself has costs and you will eventually hook up. So
Yes.
you don't just pay when you hook up, you actually are paying for the total baby. And boy, was that a tough policy question. But once we got it through, everybody got it. So people were paying for a wastewater treatment plant. They were all on septic tanks. That
Yeah.
didn't happen for 5 years.
That's how they do it in Spain.
Yeah, but we sold the concept to our customers to say, you're all gonna like the end game, so you have to start paying now.
It's a matter of believing in it.
That's right.
The challenge now is with the regulations that are coming down and the recently passed regulations. You look at lead and copper, and Kim and I have talked about this. I honestly cannot even tell you how impactful this is going to be, because the way that the EPA is moving forward with this, the utility company now bears the responsibility of private side replacements. You cannot burden a homeowner for private side replacements.
Right.
It's not an asset. So it's not a capital expense, which means the only thing that we can think of is it has to be an operations expense to the tune of $6,000 per connection. And if you just throw out, if there's 500 lead connections, private side, mind you, private side, not owned by us, we have to fund that. Now, naturally, you would say, oh, you could go get money because there's money out there. Disadvantaged money,
There's
not
decision,
advantaged.
right? Yeah.
Not advantaged. And we've already started that conversation with the state. And they basically said, you have to create a case around a specific group to be able to get that money as advantaged.
Wow.
Wow, that's a really
So
serious problem.
you're
'Cause there is
talking,
grant, money. There's lots of grant money, but disadvantaged or individuals actually can get grant money.
correct, and now you're talking about how do you create a case? So like naturally, they're like, well, you can come and get money, right? You can come get a loan. What am I getting a loan for? It's not an asset.
It's not an asset.
So we are now at the point, and we haven't even taken this to the board yet because we're still diving through. I mean, we have to submit our inventory by the 16th.
Right.
Then you got to do your 30-day letters after that. And then you start going through, okay, how you're going to do this. And most other municipalities, your DC Water, your Baltimore, which do have more disadvantaged sections of their community,
Yeah.
obviously they're going after a pot of money. But the way that it's structured now is you either, meaning the utility, bears the replacement, meaning you do it yourself, or you do it the opposite, which is you tell homeowner A,
Right.
go and get a quote. That quote has to come back to us. We have to approve that quote. And then they can move forward, outlining what they have to do, the documentation they have to do. They have to submit that back to us, and we have to pay on behalf of the homeowner. It's exactly how it's written in the EPA documentation.
Oh, there's so many issues. There are legal issues. You're on their private property.
That's why if you're paying on behalf of a homeowner,
Yeah.
you get away from that because now it's between the property owner and the plumber, and
Yes.
you're paying the plumber on behalf of the homeowner.
Yes, exactly. And so you can hire a plumber for the project.
But
and you can,
this is millions.
no, this is millions of dollars.
Millions, and it's not capital. That's the tough part with this, because you can't sit there and just throw it in capital. And then you take PFAS, which is this kind of unknown on water and wastewater.
Yeah.
That we have, that we don't know. And that's kind of what we talked about too, Mike. You know, we talked about the unknowns, and before, you know, go back, what was it, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, our unknowns were the market. Now we've shifted and we kind of have this unknown on the regulatory side. And it's a pretty big unknown because it's every municipality in the country has to do this.
I'm pausing. Kim and I were both at a scat breakfast.
Yeah.
Thank God they didn't serve food, so that, no, never to eat at those. But the whole thing on the brick grant,
Mhm.
I just don't know whether, so that's building resilient communities. And we think about it here in Lewes as some small projects or elevating homes for Freeport.
Yeah.
No, they defined it. I mean, Kim and I were taking notes like, really? I mean, they defined it like, come and get the money. We
Yeah.
have so much. They also said, Philip Crane or
Kane.
Kane, he said, describe your disadvantaged community to me. Okay, and I said, so we said like elderly,
Fixed
fixed income. He goes, come and talk to me. I'll help you with that. I've never heard a regulator say that. So I just don't know. I mean, this is getting off track a little bit,
Yeah.
but I don't know when we look at that application.
That it's not a traditional definition of disadvantage,
Exactly.
but they
and-
are.
And being resilient is ensuring that our infrastructure is in place.
Mhm.
And they're talking about millions available.
Yeah.
Okay, not hundreds of thousands. So anyway, it's a separate note that we should at least test it with a scope. They'll also pay for a scoping project. So we could, BPW could put in a request to scope this issue. We'd have to really make it sound like it's not just utility, you know, it's resiliency and all. And then he can say, I can't help you, or yes, build on it, or I'll propose to FEMA, because DEMA has to apply for us. I'll propose to FEMA that this is important, and we could get paid for the scoping of what to do.
And that's what we couched to the state was how, so you build the inventory, and Sharon's been heading this up, and we feel like we have a fairly good inventory, but we have inventory on our side, but we also have to inventory every private service in our system. And every service. So any private service that exists, we have to know what's on the other side, and it's our burden to know what's on the other side. And you have, you know, homeowners, and it's not like you have basements. So you're talking about crawl spaces,
Yeah.
being able to identify and tearing up people's yards to identify service lines, going underneath the crawl spaces to identify service lines. And that is what's going to drive your replacement. And you need that to be able to drive what you're asking for. So you can't even go and say, well, I want, you know, $6 million or $3 million, because they're going to say, well, what are you going to use it
Right.
for?
Right.
You have to identify every
I mean-
service line.
Wow.
Doesn't this also have a ripple effect into the current rate payers and future rate payers rates?
And so it piggybacked off of that because you're at a point, and I'm specifically asked this question. An asset that's not a BPW asset. So do you build that into your rates, asking everybody else in the system
If it's not
to
yours.
subsidize an asset that's not your
Yours,
asset?
Right.
Jeez.
You
Right.
start thinking through, like we even said about talking with auditors, because we don't even know how to book it.
Mhm.
I don't know how you would book that.
What about
I
the
bet they will
The
not do
improvement
it.
You
for the
can't.
homeowner.
Mhm.
It seems like the EPA is a little bit off base on that. I mean, you bring the water to the
Property line, curb
property
stop.
line and so on. And if there shouldn't be lead or bad stuff in that.
Correct. Everything that's our side, that's on us for replacing.
Right. But the 15, 50, even 100 foot that's on their side. I can't imagine that there's all that much lead being picked up in that line or bad stuff. If,
It's not just lead, it's galvanized too.
yeah, okay, you know, it's.
Yeah.
Zinc and other stuff that isn't good for you, but in terms of where that water's traveled from to the curb, it seems like they're looking at the nano stuff.
It is written in there that if you're doing a construction project, so 4th Street, we did that specifically, that 4th Street and Park, oldest section of town. If you find lead, you can't stop. You have to replace. So if we're doing a project,
Right.
you have to go through, you cannot keep it in the ground.
Mhm. Well, yeah.
And that's, even if you were to say, okay, you have private sides, so, Joe Blow homeowner goes in, they replace their side, they come back and it's lead on the gooseneck, which is on our side. You have to replace it, which is what we do. We do
Yeah,
that whenever they're
understand.
identified. It is so much unknown,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but it goes into how do you financially plan for it?
Did EPA give a time frame?
You have 10 years, but they didn't give you when that 10 years
I was
starts.
gonna say when
They didn't give you a date. They just said you have 10 years
Okay.
to replace all lead service lines in your entire system. But during those 10 years, you have to do your additional testing.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
essentially, and when you do the testing, you're taking first draw. So you're really not testing the system, you're testing the service line because you turn all your system off and then first thing in the morning, you take the sample from the tap.
Right.
So it's basically what's sitting in your service lines. You have to do Brita water filters, or you have to do additional testing, meaning more frequent testing at each one of the homeowners. The expense isn't just the replacement,
No,
it's,
no, it's how you're monitoring it going forward.
Okay,
and I'm
That's-
only using that
that's
as.
depressing.
Yeah.
But I'm using,
Overwhelming.
oh yeah,
That's more.
I'm using that as an example when you start.
Okay,
talking about
but to what Mike said before. So we're all pretty happy at this point that the depreciation and so on, and the payment on the current wastewater treatment plant is, expiring here a couple years out.
Yeah.
But in a steady state condition, we'd be have to replace that. And we'd be saying, well, it's working pretty well, and we're gonna put that off for 10 years and then you'd still be in the how to finance it, which is Mike's point.
Mhm.
That may change, in the 10-year time perspective if other things happen, but we have lots of stuff like that. We might have to replace the wastewater treatment plant, we might have to replace
PFAS,
electrical.
you're putting any PFAS,
And-
you're doing undergrounding,
and
substation transformers.
and many things like stormwater,
Uh-huh.
where, to quote one of our board members, we're gonna have a lot of water problems in this town in the next 50 years. And, a a way to deal with that, not just BPW, but everybody else. And
So maybe we need a holistic policy that says all these things are happening to us, and as Bob's saying, and we know this, it's getting worse. And we can't.
every time he talks.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's for sure.
Exactly.
It's our miracle.
Well, you're doing your job extremely well.
Yeah.
I'm ready to resign from this committee. But we can't possibly do all these things.
No.
And EPA does know that, you know, they're doing it at the high level and there's gonna be enforcement and whatever.
So
But
which ones do
I-
you do?
Yes, so I've never seen EPA come down on a community that has a plan and they're trying to get there. I've seen them come down on a consent order because they have bad performers, okay?
Yeah.
So what we should do is we should look at the holistic horrible and say, all right, wastewater, maybe that moves out, and, you know, I'm just throwing things out here. 5 years from now. Now what we're gonna really work on is lead and copper, and we're gonna use our rational approach, which is the inventory and oldest parts of the city first. In other words, we're gonna take all the pieces of the puzzle and the board, the finance committee would say, you can't possibly afford all this. So break it up into pieces. and
Do a
priorities.
reality check.
Do a reality check. And then we'll fund to those, and it's gonna take us 20 years to deal with what we know now.
But
And then it
again, as
actually-
you go back, you have a plan and
Yes,
that's
you have
the
a plan,
plan.
and
It's a living
that's,
document.
it's a living
Yeah.
document.
Yeah.
New requirements will be coming in, we all know that, but that's when the health departments and EPA say they're doing the best they can.
Right.
And then when they see that, I was under a consent order, so I really do know how they
Mhm.
view these things. They are more positive when you go after grants, because they say, poor little Lewes, they have so many issues. They're doing their best, we have to help them. I mean, they never say it that way, but that is what does happen.
But that's the idea.
But without that overall comprehensive plan of how we're dealing with our problems, you get nailed.
Good old company.
Yeah.
Let's go back to it.
Well, the other thing is you learn, you know, let's say that we find we'll start out and say, you know, the lead pipe issue at Carolyn's house
Mhm.
is gonna cost $8,000.
Mhm.
But I bet by the time we're done, you know, we'll learn how to get that price down to
Mhm.
something.
It's
So if
identifying.
you start many of those initiatives that
Yeah.
you're
Mhm.
talking about.
Yeah.
You learn along the
Uh-huh.
way and it becomes more manageable, more routine.
And a reality.
Correct. It's
Yeah.
just,
And you're also getting the job.
Yes, absolutely.
it's the unknowns and the inability to ask any question because there is not a single point to give you an answer.
No.
But
That's-
still, if you
that's-
link on to what Amy was saying
Yeah.
is, if it comes across as though you have a plan.
Uh-huh.
That's the most important thing, that you have something working.
That's plan and messaging.
Yes.
It's a plan and messaging, that's
Yes,
right, and going to
yes,
Mike's
yes.
point, we're now looking at 10+ years. In other
Correct.
words, you can't even, doesn't even make sense financially look at this for a couple of years, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah, right.
impossible.
Long term, definitely.
What I like about these discussions too, I think they'll help us think a little more realistically about the size of the reserves, for example, whether it's capital reserves or resiliency and so on and so forth. All these things start to fall in place, and then we start having these richer discussions about, you know, what these policies really should look like.
Mhm.
All right, to go back to the report.
So sorry.
Oh, yeah, right.
There was another report that was attached, we've already scrapped that, and this is
I just want to be,
the new,
I want to be where
the
you
new
are.
reiteration
That's,
of it,
you on here?
yes,
Okay.
Does Mike have that one?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, that's that one. So
Oh, that's reserves. This is
Yeah,
balance.
we did it
Okay.
simpler the first time around, and we felt like things were getting lumped together that really shouldn't get lumped together, and
Mhm.
things that were happening weren't really being shown. So we wanted to do a little bit different of a breakdown, so then we tried to mirror off of the financial reserves of the operating and then the capital activity. And then you can see the cash flow balance and what our actual position is. We scrapped that first one and I haven't updated the new numbers.
Okay,
But this would be the format that we're looking at now. Of your operating, so that's gonna be, your monthly income from billing. And from developers, and then your expenses, again, your day-to-day stuff.
Mhm.
And then for capital, it's going to be your impact fees, your draws from reserves. The construction in progress that's happening, the assets that we're buying. Instead of being lumped together into different categories that we didn't really think belonged to each other. So this will show more of a breakdown of where we're healthier and where we might need more work, like we might need more money in capital, we might need more money in operating. And with that, does it go with rates, does it go with impact fees, etc.
Using lead and copper as a prime example, private side replacement, if it's deemed, working with our auditors, that it should be in operations and maintenance expense, then it's gonna drive O&M. The
Of
question
course.
is, how do you fund it? And that would be the follow-up to whatever that looked like.
Kim, you're going through the overview of the cash balance sheet.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think we're trying hard to do is to recognize that any organization is complex and produces an enormous amount of data points. And they need to be organized in a way that people can sort of absorb and make decisions, with the information as it's presented. So one of the things you're going to see is a real effort here to make these documents all feel and look and read very similarly, so we can kind of start to think about what's in there and less about trying to figure out, is stuff written from left to right or right to left, or what's,
Mhm.
we're also, it doesn't have to be this way. I come from the investment side of the world, so we tend to look at cash flow a little bit more than what I would say accrual accounting. So we could show income statement type work, but Kim and I are organizing this around a cash flow structure. And Kim's going to tie this back in with the audit as well to make sure the historical stuff all matches the audit. So there's a whole lot of things that'll come out of, I think, that will come out of this structure. There's also no right or wrong in a sense of how you organize these. They have to be designed in a way that kind of fits with the way the organization operates and runs. In the Board of Public Works' case, it feels like a good first pass is to organize it around individual utilities, but we also have to understand how the organization as a whole wraps up. So that information is on here as well. But this will be a work in progress. If anybody has, thoughts and, suggestions, we can certainly do it. There'll be more layers. What Kim is showing you is an overview sheet. So there'll be layers behind it that will get progressively more complex. But what you want to do is at least start off with the broader. You don't want to lose the forest for the trees, so to speak, right out of the gate.
so Mike and Kim, in this case, how do you identify, and is there a difference on the management costs related to any of the individual buckets of your different industry lines? The reason I'm asking that is, so it's like, if this were a corporation, I'd want to know what's my indirect rate to deliver that service, right? How do we demonstrate that? And I'm asking the question for a variety of reasons. One, you could see maybe there are too many management costs. Some utility is costing too much to deliver. And so what does that tell us? We don't have the right rate, or we have a bloated infrastructure, I don't know what else tells. But also, when you go for grant money, they're going to want to know that, like, are you inefficient? And I don't know how
How do you read it?
I don't know how to read it. That's
I
exactly
know where
right.
you're going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that's not in this sheet right now is we have there's models. I'm kind of talking over Kim, and I apologize, Kim. So
Okay.
please, there are models that are more complex. Every organization that has multiple divisions has both direct and indirect costs. The direct costs are pretty obvious. We need this truck for utilities. We need this wire for electric utilities, so on and so forth. And then there's the indirect costs, which Kim ultimately has to make a decision within, I'm sure, auditing guidelines about how the general and administration costs are allocated across the 4 different utilities. And
Right.
Amy, I think that might be part and parcel in your conversation, and that's more in the, what I would call the indirect costs. How are those allocated?
Right,
Mhm.
so they become cost centers and using a private sector model, is that how you really? Like, in other words, each one of them becomes its own cost center in a sense?
So that you can follow it.
Kim can talk through how she does that,
So the rate for when it's like admin, it gets split up 45%, 26%, 24%, and 5% for electric, water, stormwater, and
No,
or
electric water,
Oh, yeah.
sewer.
wastewater and
Yeah.
stormwater.
Okay,
That was based off of rates that were set on income.
Uh-huh.
I do think that should be reviewed again.
I agree.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
But that is what is set up right now.
Okay, that's,
Yeah.
thank you, that's really helpful.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think that has to be reviewed,
because it changes.
it changes and you need to look at what's going on by delivery by each of those, yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah,
It feels like as a group, as we've talked through
Oh,
this,
right.
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on with these types of financial reports, but I think it's going to put us in a really nice position to be able to start, Amy, to have that conversation next. Why are we only reserving this much for capital activity? Why are we only doing this much for resiliency? That's the next layer. But the first thing I think we need to do is all be very clear on where we are right now. That cash sheet that Kim put up first, the financial reserves. The first thing you see here is that with the policies that are in place today, we are under reserved relative to policy across all four of our utilities for the operating reserves. When you lump all these assets into big pools, this is very unclear. So we've got to have not just a way to develop a policy, but we've got to have a way to monitor it. And I kind of look at this as being all part and parcel with that.
And explain it.
Any other questions, discussion on Kim's reports?
I just want to comment on something that Mike said, there's no right or wrong way to do it, we just have to agree to a way, understand it, as Carolyn says, be comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And then review it, I mean, there are all different ways to structure it, but that selling concept to ratepayers and all is really gonna be
Yeah.
dependent
Yeah.
on our ability to say.
And we
Yeah.
better be comfortable and know what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Well, how much are the indirect costs as a percentage of the total?
I don't know that number.
Well, really.
Well, I would expect that they're relatively small.
Yeah, I think you're right. We could probably pull up one of the operating models, Kim, and give a quick answer to that, but we have that in the more detailed models.
You guys are doing great work. I mean, this is great. It's just, yeah, there's a lot of, and it's a lot for the board also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when you deal with the board, and any board, because I've been there, done that. It has to be as clear and concise and as simple as it can possibly be, because you will see a board sit there and they'll look, their eyes will wander, which means they are not with you.
Yeah.
Okay, and that happens.
That's right.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
So it has
Yeah.
to be, we have to be comfortable enough to make it as simple as possible for the board to understand.
So that's an interesting, I agree with you. I think one of the things the finance committee maybe could do in this process is take a snapshot of where our concerns are. So the board, the worst thing is to go to the board with, here's how we're gonna do everything. But they need to know we're undercapitalized in this few areas.
Yes, everything.
So in other words, here are the issues, now we're working on them, but here are the issues. I would want as a board
Because
member to know
the
that.
value of that is getting it from them.
That's right, and they'd
You
be
know,
like, okay,
We think we've got the answer to everything. I don't mean to cut you
no,
off.
go ahead, go ahead.
And we
Yeah,
walk
okay.
in with it because we've been in it for a while.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that they, remember, a lot of
Well,
them, they don't
almost.
stay in this.
To your point, almost a starting point is Austin's core dump on
Doom and gloom with that one?
that these are the things we're gonna have to worry about.
Mhm. They're real.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But, you know, at the top of Tom's list is always storm.
Yeah.
At the top of Austin's list is
Regulations.
regulations and lead and PFAS. And, you know, at the top of somebody else's list is sewage treatment plant.
So interestingly, to go along with that, I went and visited Frederick County's wastewater treatment plant yesterday. So we went over, it's $150 million investment is what they spent. And with any investment, there's good things and bad things with it. And what they talked about, I mean, you're talking about wet wells that are 80 feet deep. We walked down 80 feet to go to the bottom of the wet wells. They are now talking about PFAS and what's coming down the pike on the regulation on the wastewater side, because there are a lot of lawsuits that are starting to come up because a lot of your biosolids, when you dry it to a cake, you're drying it and then you're doing what? You're doing land application
Yes,
is
you
one of the biggest things. Well, down in Texas, there's a huge lawsuit because a farmer is claiming that his livestock was killed and he had elevated levels of PFAS. What you're starting to see is wastewater operators as a whole are actually coming together, and it was a discussion topic up there, and almost doing joint facilities, because one of the only ways right now to get rid of it is incineration. And they're talking about where we have an agreement with Sussex County where we have a biosolids arrangement where we send our biosolids to be dried and then land application. There's talk of these joint facilities being funded by wastewater, you know, it could be counties, municipalities, private sector, to essentially build incinerators to send their biosolids. And that is something where the regulation is unknown, but they're seeing the writing on the wall because of these lawsuits.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like it helps climate change too.
And then air quality.
Okay, maybe a thing to
That's real
do
good there.
for the next meeting is make the list
Yeah.
Yes,
of things and depress us, you know.
yeah,
Yeah, but,
The press.
well, it is depressing, but it's
Yeah.
gonna be depressing to the ratepayers too, and you know, then you can say 10 million here and 50 million there, and
And this is why.
and rather than a laundry list by major categories, so there are these consequences, regulatory compliance is a growing area. I think you're right, I think that would say to the board, we've identified, but we aren't the policy group. We're the how you're gonna pay for it group, so let's all agree to the same catastrophic list, and then we'll go back in and we'll start working
Yeah,
on
the
the money side.
catastrophic
Yeah.
list.
And what we want to do is essentially, we want to develop relationships with local and local, state and federal officials,
With them.
because your small voice here
No question.
really needs to get louder and louder,
Yeah.
because it's not, you're not coming at it from an opposition side. You're coming from it as like, we all agree that drinking water should be available, clean, free of any contamination. How do we get there? Instead of, here's what you're gonna do,
Mhm.
and we don't know how we're gonna fund it yet, but this is what you need to do.
Right.
I had an expression I always use, get the bandits on the train. Get everybody, seriously, because
Yeah.
it's the only way it's gonna work.
Right. So that would be, what are we in September? What's a
Okay.
reasonable time frame that we could, next meeting, kind of look through that, and then you could, before the calendar year ends.
Depends when you want to be depressed.
Well, not at Christmas.
Before Halloween, Thanksgiving, or Christmas, pick your poison.
Halloween seems appropriate.
Yeah, I would say
Oh, God.
probably the beginning of November.
Before, yeah, I would say probably before we do the Veterans Day break and the election, because that's gonna encompass everything for a while.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Who summed this up? Go right ahead. You started.
So that's the report, so.
Well, maybe if
you'd go there.
Yeah.
So much for an
Yeah,
hour.
yeah,
It's a work in progress.
yes.
I could maybe say one of the things that you're finding here is there's an effort to revamp the financial architecture of the Board of Public Works. It doesn't change the finances, it changed the architecture.
Right.
How are we
Right.
going to look at things? How are we going to
Right.
budget things? How are we
Right.
going to project things? How are we going to, think about policies? They're all architectural decisions.
Mhm.
But you don't, eventually, and hope sooner rather than later, because I think we've got a good path here, the architecture will be largely complete. And what would be the best use of this committee's time would be to have Kim come, let's just say, I'll just use the financial reserves report again that she put up here, and just say, hey, everything looks good, except we've got, line 12 and 13. I just want to point you out that we're under reserved in operations, and here's how we're recommending we're going to fix that, or here's the 3 options. What option do you think we should take to fix this? And so very quickly, I hope we can get through the architectural piece of this and get to the decision-making piece of this. But if we're doing these reports correctly, and these are powerful reports, I mean, that cash report has a whole bunch of budgeting in it. It's got forecasting in it. It's got policies in it. It's got under and over, there's a lot of stuff that's on that one page. If we set this up correctly, we should put ourselves as a committee all in a much better position to make policy recommendations and to point out early on, hopefully, financial problems that are coming down the pike. And the earlier we can point them out, the more time we'll have to kind of self-correct, if you will. So I hope everybody feels good about this. I went down the same path with the Children's Beach House. I'm the board treasurer there at the Children's Beach House. And, we've, after several iterations, we've come to an architecture that makes sense for the complexion of that organization. And now we're focused in a finance committee on making decisions, not on, what line items should we have here? What line items should we have there, so to speak? But,
And I also say that there has been a lot of influence of contractors coming in, looking at our stuff and setting policies. And we're just like, okay, like we don't really know why they did that. What was their thinking of setting those policies? So
Exactly. What is this? What package are you using for this?
it's just Excel.
Is Excel?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a
To
good
Kim-
choice about the contractors. And I like your term about revamping the financial architecture. We're not just moving the chairs on the Titanic, we're not doing that. We're actually rethinking how to do this so that you can identify current and future rather quickly
yes,
to find your problem areas.
that's exactly right.
So,
Thank you.
To Kim's point, I think it was a really good one. One of the ways a lot of organizations are designed, they use a lot of consulting, but I think we said this the last time. It's a lot like looking at an elephant. One consultant looks at the tail, one consultant looks at the trunk. They all have their own specialty, and if you don't have an ability to be able to look at the whole elephant, you really can't assess whether the recommendations of each individual consultant is the right recommendation. So when this structure is complete, if it works correctly, when we get rate recommendations from, let's say, the rate consultants, Kim should be able to very quickly determine whether those rate recommendations are going to meet our goals for reserving, for example, meeting our resiliency numbers, all these other, we should be able to tell that very quickly and not simply just blindly, I don't want to say we're blindly accepting, but not accept without much challenge these recommendations for consultants that only see portions of the business.
and just to go back to the meeting you and I went to, that's a perfect segue to the finance committee recommending on grants that we get a scoping grant from FEMA to look at. I know Tom always says, hardening the grid, but I would say it's also what's our overall resiliency plan, and in their language, hazard mitigation plan to protect our utilities. And so that plan is a 75-25 cost share, but the 25 can be staff time. Okay, so it's not money out. It can just be, you just have to make sure your time cards are showing that activity. It's a cost reimbursable grant. It also allows you to do special technical projects. So let's say you want to bury some utilities, that's allowable under this grant. Because you know that the utilities on the beach side are just gonna get slammed, okay? I mean, you don't have to be an engineer to know they're probably going first. And so, or maybe you worry about the trunk line on Savannah. So I just really think that, and we have not plenty of time, but we've got time to scope that and help this overall strategy and get it funded by folks, so. And it's interesting, just one last thing on that. They said, BPW could apply
Yes.
directly. Yeah, I was on a brick training webinar from FEMA yesterday, and they said, no, it has to be through a city and a town through your state. So that's different direction. I would
No,
go,
we have gotten
You-
brick just
got it.
specifically us for
Yes.
like the
Good.
stations.
well, that's
Hazard
good.
mitigation money.
Yeah.
A hazard mitigation, yeah. Okay, well, good. That's what I thought you
Yeah.
had said, and I thought, why is FEMA saying something different than DEMA? But I'd go with DEMA.
Yeah.
No matter what, in terms of that answer. Okay, but I do think we should look at that because we could start getting a consultant who looks at the entire elephant. And you're just couching it as, how are we protecting our utilities from a storm? And if that's our board president's number one issue, there's money for that, but I think it can address some of the things we're talking about right here.
Let's go to the debt service coverage ratio, which we have reviewed previously, and just what we had added in here was the time period of bringing the reserve policy back up into compliance with our current policy. Which, and the time frame was 6 months. And it ends currently, the 5-year ends in 2026.
That's cash reserve. This is for debt service coverage.
This is new.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't have a debt coverage ratio.
Okay.
No, this is the one we were talking about
Yeah.
doing.
All right.
At one
Yeah.
point, yeah. We
So-
needed to at that time determine what that would be.
Mhm.
So the 1.25 was the floor for AAA rating. And after we put it in front of you guys, the first time we were talking about if there should be a deadline of when we get back into the 125, if the board does agree that we do need to go below the 125. And we said 6 months. That was the last meeting. Everyone seemed to be good with the 6 months, so this is the final presentation of it. And then it would go in front of the board as a recommendation from the finance committee.
Right.
And we wanted to do that for this coming month's board meeting, have it up on the agenda.
So one of the things that I was doing at the planning commission, and Bob did it as well when we were both on planning, which I think helped mayor and city council. So maybe for your board, is that we would always do, so like in this plan, an opening, let's call it a preamble of the why. Because you're jumping right into the what, and I had mayor and city council stuck on the why a lot. And so what the planning commission did is, so like for wetlands, what's the value of a wetland? Okay, so we went through all of those. So it's a little harder to not accept the ordinance idea, but I think we should do that, just as you've just said.
Yeah.
This is the floor for AAA. Here's why we do this. It's a little easier for, I think, a board to
Sure, because they have
understand,
no
'cause-
background on
because they have no
anything.
background.
Does the city have a policy on debt coverage ratio?
I don't think so, but
No.
I'm noting it. I don't,
The
you think so? I don't
Well, the
think so.
reason I brought it up was I think the thought behind the potential thought was funding opportunities for the facility, the Army Reserve,
Yeah, I
for
knew
the
you
new
were gonna
town
say
hall.
that.
Oh, exactly.
And if that's going to bond rating, a lot of the financial pieces that we're actually pushing for, a lot of it was stemmed from us wanting to be better between Kim and I having
That's
pretty
not
detailed conversations. But DMAC, which we both sit on as board members, is doing something very similar.
Yeah.
And we just went through a huge credit rating discussion, and we also talked with PFM And PFM had said, one of the things you want to do before you walk in
Mhm.
for any sort of bond discussion is
That's
making
amazing.
sure you have all your policies in place
Yeah.
because it helps you with your rating.
Okay, that's
Yep.
great, that's good advice, we're
Yep,
working on
yep,
investment
yep, yep,
strategy, but I haven't seen it, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but. But if you're telling me you haven't seen it,
Mm-mm.
then probably we have a hole there, but so I just think that preamble, and if that's just the practice we use, it just helps. You know, it's not PR, it's really justifying why this pay board member, why you should care, and so it's a little easier to,
It's a nice into when you present them.
right,
The more you can give up front before you immediately get into the 1.25
yeah.
and assume there's too much assumption up front.
Mhm.
That's
Okay.
basically what you're saying.
But then I think what else is here is good.
Oh, yeah, no.
So then the question is, do you still wanna try to do this on this board meeting?
I don't need to
Because
slow
if
you
so,
down.
Yes.
Sorry,
Then
Yes.
I would send like an email with the,
with a preamble.
yeah,
Yes,
and then it'll
Yes.
just be,
which is easy for them to get. Then
Yeah.
they'll roll with
it'll
it.
be an email to the finance committee that everyone
Yep.
Yeah,
agrees that they
right.
like the way it is, and then it'll be presented to the board still. Okay.
Yeah.
You'll
Right.
probably
Okay.
have to send that to Mike as well, because he'll have to do it by resolution.
Well, but Mike, I've already spoken with him. He said if we get this approved, then the board would direct him to put it into financial, legalese to then come back and be
Okay.
approved as a resolution.
Okay, I just want to be sure it wasn't, we were
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
kill two birds with
No.
one stone at this meeting.
We gotta go through Mike
Okay.
for the dot the i's.
Yeah, the question was whether or not
Thank-
Mike
thank
is
you
gonna
for asking.
draft
Um,
the resolution for adoption since it's going into our policy.
Okay, but we're
But you
all
can
agreeing
just-
on this.
Yeah, and you could just write the preamble.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then flow it to him and, I mean, as Amy was saying, that's all you need is a pre.
And it's language like, best practices. in
Basic.
Utility are to do this, that kind of language.
Basic English,
Yes,
I was saying for you guys to review before
yes,
it goes to
Yeah.
the board.
yes,
Okay.
right.
yes, we understood that.
Okay.
I mean,
We're-
sorry,
we're-
guys.
we-
We understand that would have to go out before next Wednesday.
Yep.
Okay,
So-
It shouldn't take long.
Okay.
Right.
So moving to the developers agreement, we had the final legal language,
oh, yeah,
including all of the things that we had previously discussed of the amount and the discretionary and how it's funded and so on. And we would like to take this to the board and accept it as policy, because only the 4.14 was in the original policy,
Right,
and everything else has been to address the lagging in reimbursing the BPW from the escrow account of contractors who don't have an obligation, legal obligation as part of the developers agreement of what their responsibilities are with regard to the escrow account.
Is this one going for that, like administrative approval and then coming back with a resolution?
Should, that, I'm not quite sure, but and Mike said that this could go directly to the board for approval.
but he thinks
And-
this is ready.
Yes.
Mhm.
He helped draft that.
Right.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
I'm
He's
trying to
gone-
think, because it has to be separated out in the agenda then. Yeah, you're gonna have two, because right now it's
It's just recommendations. Okay,
Yeah.
I can separate it.
So there was the email chain of us, Richard, asking Mike about the questions,
Right, we saw
yes,
that they
that,
I saw
have.
that.
we saw those.
and he went through about like the commercially reasonable, the first paragraph where it's pretty much protecting us of how, whatever we wanna set it as, we can, but here's a floor that we're gonna set it at is
Mhm,
$50,000.
Mhm.
I think that was the two biggest.
Well,
Well, you gave us all the
based
notes,
on
which
yeah,
are good.
the reimbursement within
15 days for the
days.
reimbursement.
Is another
Yeah.
aspect.
I appreciate having the notes attached.
Yeah.
Which, put us back to where we need to be.
And I think a lot of these we've already incorporated into like the most recent development agreement.
Right,
So
that's
this,
what Mike-
this
what
is a
Mike has
document to
said,
go into the form agreement.
Yes.
So
Okay.
we've done those, we knew that this was coming, so we've actually incorporated a lot of these.
Okay.
So this will be like the formal template.
Mhm.
So this is a vast improvement.
Yes,
That's a good word.
not a.
We had no protection.
Yeah. What we've had essentially is we've had examples where developers, the way that it was set up, and we're moving on this too, but they would pay $50,000 when it drops below 25, they would have to replenish.
Yeah,
We've had developers that haven't replenished that are, well, it's not hundreds, but thousands of dollars behind.
yeah, well, see, that's where the
And we
fines
don't-
come in.
And we don't have, we don't have that mechanism in
Yeah.
place now to say,
Yeah,
only thing we can say is you're gonna maintain and own all of the development until it's accepted.
no, you gotta
So
get it in
that's
the pocket to
hard.
get it to go to the next stage.
Well, and at the end of the day, who are the people in the development gonna call when there's an issue? They're gonna call us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because the contractor.
Oh, God.
Yep,
Yeah.
on the next phase,
Mhm.
okay.
So
This
this,
counters Austin catastrophic list. This is in the good list.
Yeah.
I like the positivity.
one for us. So is this on the board meeting next time?
It will be.
That's,
Okay, we're good.
So the next item is the existing policy 3.7 investment guidelines, which we've already talked about indirectly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's too old to deal with.
But there is, my view, having gone through this, is there's no point in trying to fix this paragraph by paragraph.
No.
Right.
Sure.
There
Alright, so-
are, in going through, there were 9, what I'll call entities listed as having their fingers in the pie. GM, Assistant General Manager.
Oh, yeah,
Board,
right, I read
Investment
that.
Committee,
Yeah.
Treasurer,
Yeah.
Third Party, Cash Management Policy Board.
Yeah.
Financial Institution, Investment Manager,
Really.
all with different,
Perspective,
things.
yeah.
and then a strategy of 4
That's funny.
listed items
Yeah, in the back.
with whoever figured out what the range was,
Yeah.
there's no rhyme or reason apparent. And trying to adjust and debate, well, maybe this should be instead of 15, 20, or
Yeah.
Starting.
we should just start again.
Well, age
Segueing
caught up
from
with
the
this.
new financial architecture that we're putting together.
Mhm.
So you're saying brand new policy?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Did we get D-Max?
I can,
I was gonna say that one may be a good one to play off of.
I can,
You could
ask
probably,
them to send out an email for everyone in the municipalities.
does the city have something?
The city has something. It was in 2014 and it's been amended for 10 years. And I had the same conversation and I said, no, we're not gonna, because you have to read it and then you have to go to every amendment. So the amendments weren't even brought in to the body. You have to read this and then it's like reading the Clean Water Act and then don't forget to read all the amendments because it doesn't mean what the original. So what we're doing is doing just what you're doing. We're saying, let's write it again.
It's for us to know and you to find out.
That's right.
Most of the thing we
I
touch
think
is
there
age.
should be some congruence,
There should be, yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Well, luckily Richard sits on the city finance committee. But we should share in any way because don't we all have, it's UBS, right?
Mhm.
So if it's helpful to you, we're meeting, so I would say to all of you, not that you want one more meeting, just to zoom in. But we're meeting every other Tuesday. So we met this Tuesday to kick it off. And our next meeting will be on the investment strategy. So UBS is coming and hopefully they're not doing just boilerplate.
Well, you can tell them.
which
to
is
do.
what they did last time. They just gave you,
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that is
Yeah, but
their,
see, you have to,
that's
I
their
know, I
business
know.
model.
Skies are
Okay.
blue.
the skies are
Sun is
blue.
shining.
They said the skies are blue, Trump is gonna win. They gave us some, I'm like, who are you people? Right, and so they got the corporate speech, Mike, you know that, right? They got the corporate speech and so we're like, oh, no.
yeah,
Next
but see,
time.
they will do that, but it's.
Unless we
It's
ask.
on you.
Exactly. So I will send, Kim, I'll send you the list of our meetings because there may be some that it would be helpful.
It's about
Yeah, that was
time
definitely
that
overlap.
connection is
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Amy, what is it that UBS manages for the city? Is it a reserve account, a retirement account?
All.
All,
All.
Everything.
Yes.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And kind of, this is my personal view. What's your view? Because
No, you go right ahead, honey, I'm not
kind
in
of
it.
fat and happy, like nobody's been challenging them. Carolyn did when she was treasurer, but my view, so I'm only saying that here and not recorded, is, I'm not saying that.
Well,
they're
it is
wrong.
recorded.
Oh, it is recorded. We can't clarify as a council person. Not that I think they're doing anything wrong. I don't think we've pushed them to say, what are also the other alternatives?
Well, that's why one of the things I did get into before I got out of there was, listen, we don't need money, just sit and do something with it, so.
Yes,
And just opening up CDs, if nothing else, we
did
brought
such a
in,
good-
you know, we.
yeah, you cleaned
You know,
all that.
and that, you know, it's hard, because they're not the only person you're working with, you got all these other things, and you meet them
Exactly,
quarterly, and it's,
exactly.
but the more you can do this,
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
better off you're gonna be.
Yeah. So Mary Lou, who's on our finance committee, is our lead on investment strategy. Mary Lou, she's got like two last names, Wilbur.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure, my guy,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
not my
she
guy,
was
but my
yours.
person, yeah.
Yeah, and so
Yeah, oh,
she's staying on our finance.
Yes,
I don't think
yes,
anybody else is staying, but she's staying.
yes.
But she and Tina Sampson, who lives on Park. So they have this background. So
Yes.
I'm gonna send you
She's
our schedule.
excellent,
She's excellent.
yes, she is.
So we have a good team to like
Yes.
punch holes in it
Happy
or
to
keep
hear
it, you know, like, but the main thing I want is I'm not gonna look at amendments, you know, it's something
Right.
that dated 2014.
Deal with reality,
Yeah, exactly.
good.
So the next item was the 10-year financial forecasting, which is still in process and is gonna kind of flow out of the
Comes out of what's
new
happening.
financial architecture
Yeah, of
that's being
course.
put together. So that's what that is, and then any
This-
current potential future agenda.
It's so funny, I wrote
items.
something here before we had this discussion today, and I said, rewrite and update objectives and guidelines.
Yeah.
That was before we even met today, after I looked some of this stuff. So
So
we're going on, we're on track with that.
on my task to make you all depressed, what exactly am I pulling together?
Oh,
Our
God.
concerns list.
The concern.
That's a good way to put it.
Concerned list
Yeah, that's a good way to
With-
put it.
With regulations.
with,
What
you
does
know,
that
bullets
involve?
underneath that say.
Yeah.
This could mean that.
Yeah.
We're responsible for the private side and have to pay for it.
Yep.
In addition to.
Yeah, the implication.
And if it can be split up of like regulatory concerns,
Yep.
storm concerns.
Facility concerns, however you want to do it, but I think Bob's right, it's what's the concern, but what's the implication
Mhm.
of that concern? There's a financial, there's a technical, there's administrative. There's a timeline that we're gonna have to be compliant with.
You know. Sewage treatment plant.
Yep.
Mhm.
If not sewage treatment plant. Building a line to Wolf Neck and, disposal of the sewage treatment.
Yeah, that byproduct, I read that article on the Texas farmer.
Yeah.
Holy crap, I
Yeah.
mean, there have been municipalities, utilities that are giving away free to their ratepayers. The sewage dried material for their gardens.
Yeah.
Okay, not just farmers, but like little gardeners, because they said it's cleaner than whatever.
And it goes, it's even farther, because like, for example, when we were at Frederick, they have purple pipe. So then they're sending purple pipe out. Now, it's not domestic use, but a lot of people are using it for, if they have irrigation.
Sure.
One was the potential data center. They were gonna use it for their cooling towers,
Ugh.
but then they wanted to send it right back. So lots of,
Hmm.
you're just kind of broaching the surface. It's like the iceberg effect. You only see the top 10%, but
That's right.
I think for next time, it would be helpful to have part of what Mike seems to understand, the discussion of current ratepayers and what they should be responsible for and future ratepayers and that back and forth. And you seem to have some experience with that, but
Good, we can blame it on her.
One of the things that might help is Kim and Austin have put together a 10-year list of projects by utility, capital projects.
Yeah.
And obviously, some of those projects are going to be geared at the wearing out of equipment, replacing the roof on a house, so to speak.
Yep.
Some of them are going to be oriented around expansion of capacity because we're growing in new areas. And I guess some of them might be system upgrades, which isn't just depreciation, but you guys might be under regulation to put more sophisticated, I don't know, this is way out of my comfort zone, more sophisticated things. But Kim, is it possible to look at those without creating a huge amount of work, to look at the projects and say, in
What's-
2028, 80% of this capital project is a replacement of worn out equipment and 20% is all new stuff? Because it feels to me like that would be a starting point to start to ask this question or answer the question about how much should be being paid for by current ratepayers versus future.
Yeah, we can take a look at the list of what's replacing and what's upgrading based on regulations and what's upgrading based on capacity.
And in fact, what we should have, and this is shared with GMB, so GMB is gonna, I talked to Charlie yesterday on October 8th to the City Finance Committee or the Stewardship Committee. We have to create CIPs. We have to have our capital improvement project lists, yours and the city's. And I know yours is better meaning it's on a website. Like every time I ask that to Tom says we have ours on our website. And I'm like, okay, but when did we as two organizations look at our CIPs together? So if why are you guys smiling? No.
well,
You do?
you have to look at it from GMB used to play that point of liaison.
Yeah.
Yes.
The assumption, it's no different than if you were to look at your investment guy, UBS, you would say,
Same.
you're holding my hand through the whole thing and you know how to invest my accounts, but I'm not gonna talk to you ahead of time. You just
Yes.
know.
But the city doesn't have, okay, unless it's somewhere I haven't found yet, the city does not have its CIP of GMB projects. It's just known. I mean, that's what I keep getting. Everyone says it's just known. And so the city manager, and I'm not criticizing the city, I'm just saying, we have to have one, you have one, and then we are relying on GMB to say, if you're digging up 4th Street,
Yeah.
for your needs, are we also making sure that we're doing resurfacing and whatever else is our responsibility? But I want to do a 10-year CIP from GMB about the city projects, but I want to do it in coordination with you all. I
That would
don't
make
want to do it
sense.
isolated.
Yeah, as a citizen of the city, I would totally agree with Amy on that one. So putting my citizen hat on.
Yeah, and so the city appears to be directing them based on funding available. I haven't found another criteria. I mean, yes, GMB has the criteria of they want to keep our roads at about a 40% level of drivability. But safety, like what are our criteria? You have criterias of why you're doing your CIP. And so if we knew yours and you knew ours, I'll bet we'd find some nexus in some other areas.
Yeah, I mean,
Why?
you get to a point where if you're saying it's based off of funding, well, at some point in time, you may run into an issue where if it's underfunded or you haven't done anything, then you're gonna have to roles reverse and say, this is what we need and how do we fund it?
Correct.
Instead of this is how much we have and go do what you can with this amount of money.
Exactly, and that was
How
the
it's
reason
broke.
at the joint board meeting that I questioned why GMB was phasing that road project. and we
Yeah,
were
Bob's
increasing
Village.
mobilization and demobilization 15% plus and no contingency fees. So some of your rules of thumb, I think we could share those two. So I'm putting my citizen hat on, like, come on, we have some expertise on both sides
And use it.
and use it, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Amy, you're also at that stage, you're having the same conversations as we are, how much is being paid from current ratepayers or tax investment, taxpayers versus future? How much should we be reserving? How should this starts to make a richer discussion on how the reserve pools should be actually invested.
Without,
There's, if you're investing a pool of money for a project 10 years out, you might be wanting to do an asset liability matching investment strategy. Whereas if the pool is being invested for 1 or 2 years out, you might be in money markets. And these are you're starting down a path of being able to have a deeper, richer conversation about what these pools and things should look like. And the beauty of that is, at least just in the pools alone, I think there's a lot of great reasons for what you're suggesting, but just in the pools alone, not only can you evaluate and challenge UBS better, you can also start to look at other investment providers that might do a better, cheaper job, or better, less expensive job. And so those are all richer conversations that can be had. But if you don't have that kind of information, you're sort of in there listening to about Fed policy and tax rates from your UBS guy, which has nothing to do with the way the money is being managed per se, or whether they're doing a good or bad job for you. The good or bad job for you can only be measured by whether the investment pool is meeting your policy needs.
Right.
And the policy needs will differ depending on the role of the policy, depending on the role of the pool of assets.
no, exactly. There may be, we may say, Richard, that there's a time in next winter that we bring both finance committees together and just share where are you, what are you doing? Because we are both, I would say BPW is ahead of the city, I think a little bit in revisiting, but we're all doing the same thing. We're all revisiting everything, so there might be some efficiencies.
I would also say, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
I would also say that BPW, with its essentially product line structure, is far more able to have the discussion of current ratepayers, future ratepayers, than the city,
Oh, sure.
whose remit is everybody happy? And so if we kind of brought that to, some semblance, they'd be probably really interested in borrowing from it.
Mhm.
But I think, Carolyn could tell us that the city priorities change pretty,
I have nothing to say, really.
am I right, or am I over there depressed with?
With the list.
I understand what you're saying.
Well, we have more profit centers. That's the way I'd look at it. And so each
Yeah.
profit center, if it were a profit center, has its own BD budget and its own desires and its own goals. But I'm just listening to, I feel like I'm in a mirror, in an echo chamber. Mike, I don't know if you know Scott Ciprell.
I know him well.
Okay, so he's you on my finance subcommittee.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Okay.
I were
So then
just at a
we-
wedding together.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, there may be a time that we get you guys together too.
That's a great idea.
I'm also friends with Carl Saliba as well.
Yeah, we know that. I know that.
Okay, and that's how I got Scott on the subcommittee.
I was gonna say,
That's
I
how that
said
happened.
I said to Khalil.
Yeah, that was good. Okay,
Right, that's
Okay.
good.
so some coordination and communication is a good idea. I think
Yeah.
we can do it. Yeah,
Yeah, he was telling me about him, but it was at the end, I was
Yeah.
coming on.
great.
Any other comments? Schedule the next meeting is probably in October. But it depends on whether we have substance of note to present.
We'll wait for you to contact
I
us.
think we had a really good discussion today. And that we've got advanced 2 items off our agenda of
Oh.
the debt ratio and developers agreement. So at that point, no objection, I would propose that we
Okay.
adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending. And for
Everybody.